Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. There are few things more miserable than a London rain in late autumn. The skies hang low, the streets glisten with slick cobblestones, and the very air seems sodden with a kind of melancholy one cannot quite shake. We were confined, Poirot and I, to his warm and meticulously ordered flat at Whitehaven Mansions. The little Belgian, as always, was engaged in the delicate and quite unnecessary task of grooming his moustaches to symmetrical perfection. "You know, Poirot," I said, flipping the page of the newspaper, "there's something quite depressing about this sort of weather. Everything looks grey, even the headlines." Poirot, seated by the fire in his wingback chair, did not look up. "Mais oui, mon ami, but it is the perfect weather for reflection. The mind, like the sky, becomes still, and in stillness one notices details." I chuckled. Only you, Poirot, could find philosophical value in a rainstorm. He finally looked up, arching one meticulously plucked eyebrow. "You mock, Hastings, but it is when the world slows down that crimes unfold. People become restless, unguarded." I laughed lightly and returned to the paper. Truth be told, I was always amazed at how Poirot could pull poetry from the most mundane details. His flat was immaculate, of course. Not a cushion out of place, not a speck of dust on the gleaming surfaces. "Would you kindly pass me the silver-handled letter opener?" he asked suddenly. I did so, only to watch him use it to adjust the symmetry of a perfectly placed napkin ring. "Really, Poirot," I said, "you ought to take up interior decorating." He gave a small, satisfied sigh. "Non, non, mon ami. But attention to order. It is the first step in solving disorder." And with that cryptic remark, he returned to his grooming as the rain lashed steadily against the window pane. I was idly skimming through the Times when my eyes caught a small entry nestled among the day's obituaries. I frowned and read it aloud. "Mrs. Evelina Marchmont, aged 24, passed away on the 3rd of November at Marchmont Manor, Surrey, following a tragic accident. She is survived by her husband, Sir Giles Marchmont, to whom she was recently wed." I paused. How ghastly. Barely married 3 weeks. Poirot glanced up at once. "Marchmont. The name is familiar. A minor title, I believe. Industrial money, newly acquired nobility. How did she die?" I scanned the paragraph again. It only says, "tragic accident." No details. Poirot gave a thoughtful hum. "It is a curious phrase, is it not? Tragic accident. So often used when the truth is either inconvenient or unknown." I blinked. "You think there's something suspicious?" He smiled faintly. "I think, mon ami, that the world is full of accidents, but when youth and beauty die so suddenly, especially so soon after marriage, I find it prudent to raise an eyebrow, if not an alarm." "Well, it's not exactly a case, is it?" I said. "We haven't been asked to investigate anything." Poirot leaned forward and tapped the folded paper. "Perhaps not yet, but the dead, Hastings, have a way of speaking, if one knows how to listen." I was about to retort when the bell rang at the front door. Poirot glanced at the clock. "The post. You will indulge me. I have a curious feeling about today." He was right, as he so often was. The envelope was thick, its paper trembling slightly in my hand. It had been delivered by hand, according to the concierge downstairs. The handwriting on the front was elegant, feminine, and yet the ink appeared smudged in places, as though tears had fallen upon it. I passed it to Poirot, who examined it without opening it. "See here," he said softly. "The seal is unbroken. But note, Hastings, the inscription." I leaned closer, scrawled across the top in smaller letters with the chilling words, "To be delivered in the event of my death." "That's rather unsettling," I muttered. Poirot nodded gravely and opened the envelope with exquisite care, unfolding the single sheet of notepaper within. As he read silently, his expression darkened. Then, with a heavy sigh, he handed it to me. I read aloud, my voice catching as I spoke. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, if this letter reaches you, then I am likely no longer living. I beg you, do not believe what you are told. My death, should it come, will not be an accident. Trust no one, not even my husband. Something terrible is happening. There are whispers in the walls, cold glances, footsteps behind me when I am alone. I feel watched. Please, find out the truth. I am not mad. Evelina Marchmont." I looked up, horrified. Good Lord, this is dated a week before she died. Poirot gently took the letter back, smoothing it with reverence. "This is not madness, Hastings. This is fear. True, suffocating fear from a woman who understood she was in danger but had no proof, no ally. Except, it seems, me." "What shall we do?" I asked, already feeling the old thrill of mystery rising in my chest. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We shall go to Marchmont Manor. There is a widowmaker of a husband to meet, n'est-ce pas?" And just like that, the grey afternoon turned sharply vivid, as though the rain itself had become part of the mystery. Poirot read the letter once more, slowly this time, each word lingering in the air like the last notes of a haunting melody. He held the paper with the delicate precision of a jeweller examining a rare gem. His gaze narrowed, and I could see the unmistakable glint in his eye, the spark that only ignited when something had truly piqued his interest. "She was afraid," he murmured. "Truly afraid, and not of shadows or the dark, non. This is a woman afraid of someone close, intimately close." I shifted uncomfortably. "You think she was murdered?" Poirot didn't answer at first. Instead, he laid the letter down on the table with great care and tapped his forefinger lightly against the words. "Trust no one, not even my husband. That is not a phrase written in haste, Hastings. That is the voice of a woman who has reason to distrust those around her." He stood abruptly, smoothing the creases from his trousers. "It is interesting, is it not? She does not accuse, she implies. She does not scream, she whispers." "Poirot," I said cautiously, "you're basing all this on a few vague phrases in a single letter." "Ah!" he exclaimed, lifting a finger. "But you, mon ami, see vagueness. I see precision. Observe, cold glances. Not angry, not hostile, cold, calculated, detached, and the walls speak. A metaphor, certainly, but one that suggests surveillance. She felt watched, controlled, and all this, mere weeks into her marriage." I stared at him. Still, it could be nerves. A young woman in a new house, surrounded by strangers. Poirot waved a hand dismissively. No, Hastings. This is not nervousness. This is terror in silk gloves, and it is time we learn who wore them. "Pack a bag, Hastings," Poirot announced with finality, turning to the side table to retrieve his gloves. "Now?" "In this weather?" I protested, glancing out at the rain-streaked window. "We've no appointment, no invitation." "Precisely," he replied, eyes twinkling with determination. "When death knocks uninvited, so must we." I could not argue with that particular brand of logic, however maddening. Within the hour, we were in a taxi rattling through the misty streets toward Paddington Station. the letter safely folded in Poirot's inner coat pocket. As we bounced over the slick cobblestones, he spoke without looking at me. "We will take the first available train to Surrey. I shall write to Sir Giles Marchmont en route, informing him of our arrival. He will receive it as we approach, which gives him no time to prepare." "To prepare what?" I asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "His performance, mon ami. People, when expecting questions, rehearse answers, but truth, it hides in the unscripted moments." I shook my head. "You're convinced this Sir Giles is guilty before we've even seen the man?" "I am convinced," Poirot said calmly, "that a woman does not write such a letter unless her soul cries out. And if Sir Giles Marchmont is as innocent as the lilies, he will not wilt beneath my gaze." I sighed, resigned to another weekend of Poirot's peculiar genius dragging me into shadows and secrets. Still, I could not deny the old thrill returning, the unmistakable hum of a mystery unfolding and the knowledge that with Poirot beside me, it would soon be solved. The train cut through the damp Surrey countryside like a silver blade slicing mist. The sky had dulled into a bleak slate grey, and the fields passed us in long, blurred strokes of brown and green. By the time we arrived at the station, a fine drizzle had settled over everything, soaking hats and luggage alike. A waiting carriage, a relic from an earlier age, though kept in excellent condition, was there to meet us, its driver nodding wordlessly as he took Poirot's letter of introduction and guided us through winding lanes toward Marchmont Manor. The estate emerged through the fog like something half-remembered from a Gothic novel. Gabled roofs, ivy-choked walls, and wide lawns that lay waterlogged and desolate. A pair of stone lions stood sentinel at the entrance, moss-streaked and mournful. As the carriage stopped before the front doors, a tall figure emerged from the shadows beneath the portico. Sir Giles Marchmont was every inch the country aristocrat. Lean, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in dark grey, with a mourning band at his sleeve. His eyes, however, betrayed something else. Not grief. No, it was a kind of polished detachment. "Messrs. Poirot and Hastings, I presume," he said, extending a hand that was cold and dry. Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Permit me to offer our condolences, Sir Giles. We come not to disturb, but merely to understand." Sir Giles nodded. "You are, of course, welcome. Though I must confess, I was surprised by your letter. I had thought the matter concluded." Poirot gave a thin smile. "Alas, conclusions are not always as final as one might believe." We stepped into the house, its interior as grand as its exterior, with high ceilings, rich tapestries, and a scent of aged wood and something floral, almost cloyingly so. "Come," said Sir Giles, "let us begin." Sir Giles led us into the library, a room so heavily panelled and dimly lit that it seemed to absorb sound. He gestured for us to sit, then remained standing near the hearth, hands clasped behind his back. "My wife's death was a tragedy," he began, in a tone so composed it almost sounded rehearsed. "She was descending the main staircase. It was just after dusk. The lights had not yet been switched on. I heard the fall myself from the drawing room." Poirot did not interrupt. He sat with his hands steepled, eyes half closed, as though committing every word to memory. "I rushed to her," Sir Giles continued. "But it was too late. She had struck the marble steps. Her neck, they said. Instantaneous." He paused. There was no break in his voice, no flicker of emotion. Only the crackle of the fireplace and the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock accompanied his words. Poirot finally spoke, softly. "And you were alone in the drawing room?" "For the moment, yes. My mother had retired early. Clara, Miss Worthing, was taking a walk in the rose garden, or so I was told. Dr. Pritchard was expected for dinner, but had not yet arrived. You mention lights. Poirot said. Had the bulbs failed? No, simply not yet turned on. Evelina was carrying a vase of flowers, I believe. Perhaps she missed a step. Poirot opened his eyes fully now. Such a charming gesture, non? To bring beauty into a room, and yet so final. Sir Giles's face remained unreadable. You suspect something, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's voice was gentle. I observe, Sir Giles. I suspect nothing yet. I watched him closely. He had already begun his silent sorting of details, his subtle cataloguing of behaviour. Sir Giles had said all the right things, and yet somehow, to Poirot, that was precisely the problem. Lady Agatha Marchmont received us in the conservatory, a grand space overgrown with orchids and strange trailing vines. The air was thick and damp, heavy with perfume. She sat in a high-backed wicker chair, wrapped in a shawl that might have belonged to a duchess or a museum. She did not rise when we entered. So you are the detective, she said. From Belgium, I'm told. I always found that a curious country, so small and yet full of opinions. Poirot bowed. And England, madame, so large and yet so very discreet. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Lady Agatha gave a tight nod. Her lips pursed like she'd bitten into a lemon. My son tells me you are investigating Evelina's accident. Not investigating, Poirot said smoothly. Merely understanding. Lady Agatha turned her gaze out toward the garden, where the grey drizzle had not abated. I never approved of the match. Evelina was sweet, certainly, but unsuitable. Her father was in trade, you know, shipping. Old money, perhaps, but not old blood. And yet she was accepted, Poirot said. With reluctance, Lady Agatha replied. But Giles was insistent, and I did not wish to oppose him too publicly. I am not a tyrant, Monsieur Poirot. Of course not, he said. And yet you kept mostly to your room during their time together. I did, her voice sharpened, because I knew it would not last, not truly. Evelina was fragile. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Emotionally, physically, psychologically, it is difficult to say. She heard things, imagined things. Once she insisted someone had followed her through the West Wing corridor. Ridiculous, of course. But not impossible, Poirot said softly. Lady Agatha stiffened. If you are suggesting this house harbours ghosts, Monsieur Poirot, I will not indulge you. Madame, Poirot said with a faint smile, it is not ghosts I fear, but secrets. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Then you will be quite at home in Marchmont Manor. It was Poirot's idea to speak with Miss Clara Worthing next. She was, after all, Evelina's closest friend, or had been, at any rate. We found her seated near the window of a modest sitting room overlooking the rain-drenched garden. She wore pale blue and had the kind of stillness about her that made you think twice before disturbing it. She looked up when we entered, and though she smiled politely, there was something distant in her expression, something evasive. Miss Worthing, Poirot began gently, thank you for seeing us. We know this must be a difficult time. I'm not sure what I can tell you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything's already been said. Non, mademoiselle, Poirot said, taking a seat. Everything has been assumed, perhaps. But said? That is quite another thing. She gave a slight shrug, her hands nervously twisting a handkerchief in her lap. I was very fond of Evelina. We'd known each other since we were schoolgirls. She was kind, a little romantic, always imagining things. Imagining. Poirot's tone sharpened ever so slightly. She was easily unsettled, Clara said quickly. This house, it's grand, but it can be overwhelming, and Sir Giles is very unproper. Did Evelina ever confide any fears to you? Clara hesitated. Only that she felt, Watched. She said she heard things. I thought it was wedding nerves. Poirot nodded slowly. And the evening she died. I was in the rose garden, she said, a little too quickly. I didn't hear anything until after. Poirot stood and bowed slightly. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been helpful. As we left the room, I whispered. She seemed terribly nervous. Oui, Poirot murmured, and also terribly vague. A woman who loved her friend does not remember so little, unless she chooses to forget. We met Dr. Lennox Pritchard in the study, a short, wiry man with a bristling moustache and an air of perpetual busyness. He shook our hands briskly, then folded his arms. I understand you're here to ask about Evelina, he said without preamble. Ghastly business. A terrible loss. You knew her well? Poirot asked. Well enough. I was the family physician long before she married Sir Giles. And in your professional opinion, Poirot continued, her death was accidental. Completely, Dr. Pritchard said firmly. She must have missed a step. The stairs are quite treacherous if one's not careful. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Yet the lighting, I'm told, was not poor, and the steps, while steep, are uniform. Dr. Pritchard frowned. I suppose, but she was often distracted, you know. Nervous disposition. Ah, Poirot murmured. So she was fragile. In some respects, prone to anxiety. I had prescribed a mild tonic, perfectly harmless. And yet, Poirot said, she described feeling watched. She wrote of cold glances, whispered voices. Did she ever mention these things to you? Dr. Pritchard hesitated, then shrugged. She may have said something. I can't recall exactly. Très bien, Poirot said, rising. And one final question. Did you examine the body? Yes, the doctor replied. There was no sign of foul play. Poirot smiled politely. Of course. As we walked away, I muttered, You don't believe him, do you? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Let us say, Hastings, that I believe he has not told us everything, which, in a house full of secrets, is hardly surprising. We found Major Theodore Marchmont in the billiards room, lining up a shot with grim concentration. He was a large, ruddy man, with the kind of perpetual scowl that made you feel guilty just for existing in his presence. Detective, is it? He said, not looking up. Come to poke around in family tragedy? Poirot bowed slightly. To understand, Major. Only to understand. The Major struck the ball with unnecessary force. It clacked loudly, the sound echoing off the walls. You were not in the house at the time of Lady Evelina's fall? Poirot asked. Number Y was out riding. Ask anyone. We shall, Poirot replied calmly. And the day before, did you speak with the lady? The Q paused. We exchanged words, yes. An argument. Major Marchmont straightened. If you must know, yes, she had opinions. I had mine. I didn't like the way she was changing things around here. Such as? She wanted to open parts of the estate to the village, community gardens, art events, all nonsense. This is a family manor, not a carnival. Poirot nodded. A difference of philosophy, perhaps. She was soft, the Major muttered. Kind, sure, but too trusting. The kind of person who lets the world trample over them. And yet, Poirot said softly, she felt trampled long before the world had the chance. The Major turned away. I've said what I came to say. As we stepped into the corridor, I said, He's angry, but that doesn't make him guilty. Non, Poirot said. But anger, like perfume, tends to linger in unexpected corners. Let us see what else lingers at Marchmont Manor. The Marchmont Library was the sort of room that demanded silence. Its high windows cast long shadows across rows of ancient volumes, and the scent of aged leather and pipe smoke clung to every corner. Poirot, with gloves on, was running his fingers along the spines of books on the shelf nearest the window. I was content to observe from a large armchair by the fire, my feet aching from all the day's pacing. "You know," I said, "for someone who doesn't read fiction, you're spending an awfully long time loitering in the poetry section." Poirot gave me a sly glance. "Ah, but fiction, mon ami, often conceals truths that real life dares not say aloud." He plucked a slim volume from the shelf. Tennyson, I noted, and flipped delicately through the pages. Then he stopped, tilted his head, and extracted a sheet of folded paper pressed between two leaves of In Memoriam. "What have we here?" he murmured, unfolding it with the care of an archaeologist revealing a relic. The paper was faded and unsealed, the handwriting unmistakable, Evelina's, as I had seen in her earlier letter. If I should disappear, know that I feared it would come to this. "The house is not safe. The walls echo with secrets not meant to be heard. I am watched, I am followed, and even love cannot protect me. If anyone should read this, please do not trust appearances. They lie. They always lie." I swallowed. Good Lord. Poirot folded the letter. She hid it here, not as a confession but as a safeguard. She feared someone might read it if left openly. She trusted the poets more than the people around her. And with that, he slipped the letter into his breast pocket. "The poets speak of love and sorrow, Hastings, but it is time the house speaks of truth." The staircase was an impressive structure, sweeping, grand, and made of polished white marble that shone even in the dim light. Portraits lined the walls beside it, generations of Marchmonts staring down with grim pride. Poirot stood at the base, motionless for a long moment. Then he began to ascend slowly, his hand gliding lightly along the balustrade. I followed a pace behind, not entirely sure what he hoped to find. He stopped 3 steps from the top landing and crouched down. "Note this, Hastings," he said, pointing to a barely visible line in the stone. "A faint scuff just here, and opposite it, a small dent on the brass railing. But the position, très étrange, non?" I peered at it. "Could be from her shoe, I suppose." "Perhaps, but look closer. The scuff is angled upward, not downward." "Meaning?" Poirot straightened with a soft sigh. "Meaning she did not merely trip. She resisted. Her foot caught because it was moving against force. Someone tried to push her, and she fought back. Briefly." I stared at the steps, my throat suddenly dry. "You're certain?" "I am," he said solemnly. "And observe this further. Her fall was described as head first. Yet if she had stumbled naturally, she would have reached for the rail. There are no signs of that." He turned to me, his voice low. "She did not fall, Hastings. She was made to fall." The weight of his words seemed to echo across the marble like a distant tolling bell. I looked again at the staircase. It was no longer grand, it was grotesque. Poirot nodded to himself. "Now the question is not how she died. It is who had the heart to make her death appear so tragically ordinary." The drawing room of Marchmont Manor was all mahogany panelling and heavy drapes, the sort of place where voices seemed to get swallowed before they could echo. It was here that Poirot arranged to speak with each member of the household, one at a time. He insisted on privacy, chairs arranged just so, a small table at his elbow with a silver-topped notebook he never wrote in, but always adjusted with deliberation. I watched from the far side of the room, silently marvelling at his control of the atmosphere. Each suspect entered that room with a defensive posture and left looking subtly altered. Shoulders heavier, gazes more thoughtful, as though they'd unknowingly revealed something without quite knowing what. First came Lady Agatha, who sat with her back ramrod straight, and her fingers clutching a strand of pearls like a lifeline. "You ask about my husband," she said coldly, "but Reginald's death has nothing to do with Evelina's. Nothing whatsoever." Poirot offered a gentle smile. Madame, the dead speak to us not with words, but with silences. It is the pattern of grief I examine, not its chronology. Next came Major Theodore. His scowl was deeper than ever. Still asking questions, are you? I told you, Evelina was not built for this life. The estate, the family expectations, it weighed on her. Or was it someone else who weighed upon her? Poirot inquired gently. The Major shifted uncomfortably, then muttered something about a cursed house and took his leave. Finally, Clara. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway before she entered, as though expecting someone to be listening. I didn't want to speak in front of Lady Agatha, she said quietly. She doesn't approve of weakness. Poirot steepled his fingers. But you have known it, Mademoiselle Clara, weakness and the strength to hide it. She didn't answer, but her silence, as Poirot would later say, was full of noise. It was later that afternoon when Poirot asked Clara to join us on the conservatory balcony, a spot with just enough privacy and just enough sun filtering through to feel like a neutral ground. She arrived with hesitant steps, her posture composed but her eyes betraying fatigue. I wish I could be of more help, Monsieur Poirot, she began, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. I believe you can, he said gently, and I believe you want to. She looked down, then up again. Evelina. She was nervous from the start, always turning to look behind her, asking if I'd heard of footsteps she hadn't imagined. You believed she was imagining them? Poirot asked. Clara hesitated. I told myself she was, but something wasn't right. The way Lady Agatha spoke to her, always so measured. And Gilles, he was attentive, but almost too attentive, like a man playing a role. Poirot nodded slowly. And the letter she hid in the book? Her face went pale. You found it? We did. She trusted the poets, mademoiselle, but she also trusted you. Clara looked away, tears forming. She gave it to me first, said if anything happened, I should send it to you. I couldn't. I was afraid. Giles has influence. I thought if I said something, I'd be the one blamed. But why now? I asked gently. Because she knew, Captain Hastings. She knew something was going to happen. And I didn't believe her. I thought she was being dramatic. But she was right. Poirot took her hand lightly and said, To doubt a friend is a terrible thing. But to deny what one fears, that is human. And for a moment, even Clara Worthing looked like she might find peace. Or perhaps only the beginning of it. Of all the interviews, the one with Lady Agatha surprised me most. We found her alone in the West Wing corridor, standing beneath a portrait of her late husband, Reginald Marchmont, a stern-faced gentleman with heavy brows and the air of a man used to getting his way. I come here often, she said without turning. Reginald always believed in tradition, dignity, the importance of lineage. Poirot walked beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. And yet he left you so suddenly. Her breath hitched. You know? I know he took his own life. Quietly, and with enough care that it could pass for illness, but not quite enough to fool a woman who loved him. She turned toward us, eyes glistening. He was broken. A scandal in the family. Something about financial mismanagement. He couldn't bear the shame. Poirot said nothing. He let the silence stretch. Finally, she went on. Evelina reminded me of myself at that age. Too romantic, too eager to please. I was cruel to her because I saw the same naivete, and I couldn't bear to watch it unravel again. You believed she was imagining things. No. Her voice was almost a whisper. I knew she wasn't, but I couldn't allow it to be true. Not again, not in this house. Poirot nodded solemnly. It is a great weight, madame, to carry sorrow that has not been spoken aloud. She wiped her cheek quickly. She was not weak, you know. Evelina. She saw clearly what we all refused to see. And for that, Poirot murmured, she paid a price none of us should ever demand. Dr. Lennox Pritchard joined us in the small morning room where Poirot had chosen to conduct his final round of interviews that day. The room was light-filled and cheerful, a sharp contrast to the tension that seemed to follow the good doctor like a shadow. He arrived briskly, as ever, adjusting the cuffs of his charcoal grey jacket and offering a professional nod. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings." "Merci, docteur," Poirot said smoothly. "It is always a pleasure to speak with a man of science, so often the keeper of delicate truths." "I do my duty," Pritchard replied tersely. "I hope this is the last of your inquiries. It's been a difficult time for the family." Poirot motioned for him to sit. "Indeed. Grief clouds the household like a heavy fog. But let us speak frankly, no? You knew Lady Evelina before she became a Marchmont." "Yes, I treated her on occasion. Minor complaints, fatigue, headaches, a touch of nerves. Perfectly ordinary for a young woman under social pressure." "And yet," Poirot said, lacing his fingers, "you described her earlier as having a nervous disposition, a frailty. Was that your personal observation, or one gently encouraged by others?" Pritchard shifted in his chair. I made the judgment myself." "Forgive me," Poirot said softly, "but your records, which I have discreetly requested from your former practice, suggest you prescribed Evelina no medication beyond basic tonics, hardly the treatment for a fragile mind." The doctor's eyes flicked downward. "Perhaps I was too cautious in my wording, or too cautious in your conscience," Poirot replied. "Tell me, doctor, when you certified her death as accidental, did you observe any bruising beyond what was consistent with a fall?" A pause. Too long. Then, "Nothing significant." Poirot rose slowly. "Your handwriting, doctor. On the marriage certificate, it was firm, bold. But on the death certificate, hesitant, uneven. Why is that, I wonder?" Pritchard stood abruptly. "This line of questioning is becoming offensive." Poirot inclined his head. "Forgive me. I am merely seeking clarity. For the dead cannot speak, and so we must listen to what their silence conceals." As the door closed behind him, I leaned closer to Poirot. "You think he's hiding something?" Poirot simply murmured. "He is a man who fears being caught in a lie more than being blamed for a truth." The servants' quarters at Marchmont Manor were modest compared to the grandeur above, but no less precise in their arrangement. Poirot, never one to ignore those below stairs, had requested the full list of current and former staff. It was Mrs. Danvers, the aging housekeeper, who confirmed the detail that turned Poirot's gaze sharp as a blade. "There was a maid, yes," she said reluctantly. "Young Irish girl, Bridget Keane. Only been with us a month, flighty thing. Always poking her nose where it wasn't wanted." "And she was dismissed when?" Poirot asked, eyes narrowing. 2 days after Lady Evelina's death," Mrs. Danvers said. "Master said she'd become emotional, unsettled, said things that weren't appropriate." "What sort of things?" I asked. Mrs. Danvers hesitated. "Said she heard something the night Lady Evelina died. A scream, but no one else heard it, and you know how maids love to exaggerate." Poirot's tone was light, but I could tell it concealed something darker beneath. "Where might one find this Mademoiselle Bridget now?" "She returned to her aunt in the village, but I wouldn't pay her talk any mind. The young are always imagining things." Poirot gave a tight smile. "Yes, so are the dead, apparently." We made the short walk to the village that afternoon. Bridget, a freckled girl with intelligent eyes and a nervous energy, opened the door before we'd even knocked. "You've come about her, haven't you?" she said at once. "Indeed," Poirot said gently. "Tell us what you heard." "I was passing through the corridor bringing fresh linens," she said. It was just before dinner. I heard Lady Evelina cry out, just once, a sharp sound, and then nothing. Silence like I'd never heard before in that house. And did you tell anyone? Sir Giles, she said, eyes dropping. He told me I was mistaken, that grief made people hear things. And then the next day, I was told to pack my things. Poirot thanked her kindly and promised discretion. As we walked back up the hill, he said nothing for some time. Finally, he turned to me and said, almost as if to himself, "One scream, Hastings. Just one." It was not for help. It was the sound of betrayal realized too late. We returned to the upstairs corridor shortly after tea, Poirot insisting on one final pass through Clara Worthing's guest room. I trailed behind him, notebook in hand, more out of habit than utility, though by now I had long since accepted that Poirot noticed things I would not, even if they were painted red and screaming. Inside Clara's room, Poirot's eyes swept the space like a lighthouse beam. He moved with care, not touching anything but glancing at everything. Then he stopped. Quietly, precisely, he bent down near the dressing table. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pointing with a gloved finger. "The shoes. They are not where they were before." I leaned in, blinking. "Clara's?" "Oui. These walking shoes. Note the caked mud along the instep and toe, still fresh enough to crack. But do you recall, mon ami, that she claimed to have been in the rose garden the night Evelina died?" I nodded. "She did." Poirot straightened, his expression unreadable. "And yet the rose garden lies along the gravel path, dry, maintained. No mud there, certainly not on the night in question. But the wooded glade beyond the stables, that was muddy. You think she lied about where she was?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that Mademoiselle Clara is not the clever liar she hopes to be. The question is why lie at all?" He examined the soles again. She did not mean to mislead about the timing. Her visit to the glade was recent, but not from that evening. Which tells me one thing. She returned there. Perhaps even after Evelina's death. For what purpose? I asked. Poirot gave a small shrug. "Ah, that is what we must discover. But lies, even small ones, have a habit of snowballing, and in a house where the truth is avoided like the plague, one muddy pair of shoes might yet reveal a path to the killer." That evening, as the fog rolled back in over the Marchmont grounds and the household settled into a heavy silence, I found Poirot seated in the music room, fingers steepled, his gaze locked on the crackling fire. I sat across from him, exhausted and thoroughly baffled. "I must confess, old chap," I said, "I've no idea where we stand. First Clara, then Lady Agatha, now the maid. It's a spider's web, and I've completely lost the spider." Poirot smiled faintly, as though amused. "You are not wrong, Hastings. But it is not a web we untangle. It is a dance we must follow." I frowned. "A dance?" "Yes." He leaned forward. "Imagine, if you will, a minuet. Elegant, precise, controlled. Each step choreographed, each movement rehearsed. That is how this crime was planned. Like a minuet. Every suspect has moved into place on cue, each alibi like a practiced bow or turn. But you said something was off." "Oui, mon ami. One step, out of time. Clara's alibi, the maid's dismissal, the doctor's contradictory tone. All these are not random missteps. They are the echo of someone who has miscounted their steps in a very carefully composed dance." "And you know who?" I asked. Poirot smiled again. "I know how they danced, Hastings. The who... Ah, that is but a few beats away." Then, suddenly he stood. "It is time. Time to ask the orchestra to stop and for the dancers to face the music." The following morning, a formal summons was issued by Poirot to every resident and guest of Marchmont Manor. It was written in his unmistakable script and delivered with the utmost decorum by the butler, who looked rather pleased to be involved in a bit of melodrama. It read, "You are respectfully requested to attend the drawing room at 11 o'clock sharp for a final clarification of certain matters concerning the late Lady Evelina Marchmont. With appreciation, Hercule Poirot." "I must say," I remarked as Poirot adjusted his cuffs and smoothed his hair, "you do enjoy your dramatics." He looked positively unbothered. "It is not drama, Hastings. It is theatre, but one designed to illuminate truth. In such settings, the guilty cannot help but react when the spotlight turns." By the time the clock struck 11, the drawing room was filled with tension thick enough to slice. Lady Agatha sat near the hearth, pale and tight-lipped. Major Theodore paced. Clara looked positively haunted. Sir Giles stood with arms folded, his expression unreadable. Dr. Pritchard appeared mildly annoyed, as though he'd been dragged from a crossword puzzle. Poirot took centre stage, hands lightly folded in front of him. "Mes amis," he began with a slight bow, "you will forgive the intrusion, but I believe the time has come to lift the curtain." There was a moment of silence. Then Poirot added softly, "Because now, you see, I know who killed Evelina Marchmont." There was a peculiar solemnity in the drawing room that morning, an unspoken agreement among those gathered that the game, if it had ever truly been one, was now nearing its end. The curtains had been drawn back to allow the light in, though the sky outside remained grey and brooding. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room's panelled walls and heavy furnishings. Poirot stood near the mantelpiece, perfectly poised, a figure of calm amid the tension that had settled over Marchmont Manor like an invisible fog. Hastings, myself, stood beside him, notebook at the ready, though I scarcely wrote a word. Around us sat the key players of this sordid little drama. Lady Agatha, prim and rigid as ever, in her black silk. Major Theodore Marchmont, arms crossed, jaw set. Clara Worthing, pale and visibly trembling. Dr. Pritchard, who had taken to polishing his spectacles with aggressive enthusiasm, and of course, Sir Giles Marchmont, standing just beyond the circle, his expression unreadable. "My friends," Poirot began, his voice rich with quiet authority, "I have asked you to come together not to accuse, but to illuminate. For it is only in the full light of truth that justice can walk freely, n'est-ce pas?" Sir Giles made a scoffing sound. Poirot ignored it. "For many days I have listened," Poirot continued, "not just to what was spoken aloud, but to what was concealed. Each of you has given part of the story. Now, I shall offer you the whole." He paused then, letting his words sink in like pebbles dropped into still water. "This house," he said, "has seen much sorrow. Secrets have festered in its walls. And one woman, Evelina Marchmont, paid the ultimate price for trying to speak the truth when no one would hear her." Clara looked away. Lady Agatha did not blink. "But now," said Poirot, stepping forward, "you will hear her, through me." Poirot took a breath, drawing the attention of every person in the room with the gravity of a stage actor preparing to deliver his most important lines. "Let us begin," he said, "not with Evelina's death, but with her final day. A day that, like a carefully composed symphony, held within it dissonant notes only the keenest ear might detect." He began to pace slowly before the fire. "On that day, Evelina was not simply bringing flowers to the drawing room. She'd received a visitor in the morning, one who has yet to admit it. She confided in this person, hinted that she feared for her life. She had already written a letter to me, which arrived posthumously, and a second hidden message, cleverly placed between the pages of Tennyson, speaks of voices through walls and cold glances." Clara swallowed hard, her hands twisting in her lap. "Then we have her final movements. She was seen walking up the stairs shortly before dusk. The lights were off, yes, but it was not yet dark enough to lose one's footing, not for someone young, healthy, and accustomed to the layout. And yet, Evelina fell, or so we were told. He turned sharply to face the group. But the physical evidence contradicts the tale. Scuff marks angled upward, not downward, a railing left untouched, no attempt to catch herself, and bruises inconsistent with the fall described. Dr. Pritchard shifted in his seat. Poirot did not miss it. Furthermore, Poirot added, a single, muffled scream was heard that night. Only one. A scream not of terror, but of realization. She knew who had betrayed her. He now addressed the room as a whole. The stairway was not the scene of an accident. It was the final act of a murder performed with elegance, with silence, with calculation. The perfect crime, disguised as a tragedy of misstep. Major Marchmont opened his mouth, but Poirot silenced him with a glance. You each played a part. You each saw something and dismissed it. And in so doing, gave the murderer their greatest advantage, invisibility. And now, said Poirot, we come to you, Lady Agatha. Her chin lifted. I have nothing to hide. Non, madame, Poirot said gently. That is precisely the problem. You have hidden everything. There was a pause. Lady Agatha looked directly at him, proud and composed, but something trembled in her eyes. You stated that you were in your bedroom when Evelina fell, that you had retired early. I was, she said. The servants can confirm it. Poirot gave a gracious nod. Indeed, they can confirm you entered your bedroom, but no one can confirm that you remained there. She flinched, barely, but enough for Poirot to see. You told me once, Lady Agatha, that Evelina reminded you of yourself. A dangerous thing, to see the past reflected in the present, particularly when that past carries unresolved guilt. She began, but Poirot raised a finger. Reginald Marchmont, he said softly, took his own life in that very corridor. Your husband, a proud man shamed by scandal. And you carried that shame forward like an heirloom. Lady Agatha's voice was brittle. That has nothing to do with this. Ah, Poirot replied, but it has everything to do with it. Because when Evelina came to you, frightened, uncertain, speaking of voices and eyes that followed her, you dismissed her, not because you thought she was lying, but because you were afraid she might be telling the truth. She bowed her head, silent. You went to the landing that night, Poirot continued, not to push her, non, not to harm her, but to plead with her, to urge silence. She turned from you and walked into death, but you said nothing, to protect the family name, yes? Tears now shimmered in her eyes. I did not kill her, she whispered. No, Poirot said gently, but you let the lie live, and in doing so, helped her murderer remain in the shadows. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with what had not been said for far too long. Poirot turned his gaze slowly toward Clara Worthing, who sat near the French windows, her hands resting tensely in her lap. There was a fragility to her presence, not the type that inspires pity, but one born of sleepless nights and moral burdens too long borne. Mademoiselle Clara, Poirot said, his voice softer now, you were Evelina's closest companion, were you not? She nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes. You knew her longer than anyone in this room. You shared a bond of trust, of youth, of hope. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Poirot continued. You were the first person to whom she confided her fears, that she was being watched, that she felt unsafe in this house. You were also the first person to whom she entrusted her final letter. A soft gasp rippled through the room. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to do. She was frightened. But she didn't have proof. And if I said anything, if I passed the letter on, I knew it would destroy the Marchmonts. So you chose silence? Poirot asked gently. I didn't choose it. I was afraid. I thought she was being dramatic at first. But then she died, and I... She paused, pressing a hand to her mouth. I was a coward. Poirot stepped toward her. Non, mademoiselle. You were loyal. Misguided? Oui, but loyal. That is no crime. But tell me, why did you retrieve the letter from her book of poetry after her death? Her head jerked up. You knew. Of course. The page where it was found had not gathered dust like the others. You placed it there later, hoping someone would find it. I didn't want to destroy it. I thought maybe it would tell the truth without naming me. Poirot offered a small, sad smile. It has, mademoiselle, and the truth is kinder to you than you feared. There was a long silence. Then Lady Agatha spoke, quietly but firmly. You should have come to me. Clara gave a bitter smile. Would you have listened? No one answered, and in that moment, it was clear. The silence had spoken louder than any scream could have. Poirot turned next to Major Theodore Marchmont, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His hands, rough and reddened, gripped the arms of the chair as though preparing for battle. I had seen him bluster and bark for days now, but even I could tell he was nervous. Major Marchmont, Poirot began, you have made it no secret that you disliked Lady Evelina. I didn't dislike her, the Major snapped. She was a pleasant enough girl, but she didn't belong here. She had ideas, modern ones. Opening the gardens to villagers, art exhibitions on the lawn, madness. So you quarrelled? Yes, he admitted. She asked for my support in her plans. I refused. That's not murder. Poirot nodded. Quite right. But it is not your distaste for her that interests me, Major. It is your behaviour after her death. The Major scowled. What behaviour? You've been quite vocal in your disdain for this investigation. Defensive, prickly. I don't appreciate being accused without cause. Yet no one has accused you. Not truly. Poirot arched an eyebrow. Unless your conscience feels otherwise. Major Marchmont stood abruptly. Now look here. Poirot held up a hand. Please, allow me. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. You were out riding the day Evelina died. That much is true, but you were not alone. A flicker passed across the Major's face. Poirot continued, your companion, a man from the local stables, has confirmed that you were there, discussing not family matters, but money. Debts. You've owed a considerable sum to several betting establishments, have you not? That's none of your business. But it explains your temper, your panic, your eagerness to see this matter closed quickly. Poirot's voice sharpened. Because if word of your gambling came to light, the family name might suffer. Your inheritance might be reconsidered. The Major sat down again, deflated. I lost control, he muttered. But I didn't kill her. Poirot nodded. That, Major, I believe. You are no murderer, merely a man trapped by his own failings, trying to roar loud enough to drown out his shame. Hastings leaned in and whispered, So that's one less suspect? Poirot gave a small, enigmatic smile. Oui, Hastings, but the circle narrows, and in the middle waits the serpent. The room was still. Not the quiet of politeness, but the silence that descends when all breathing seems to pause. Poirot stood with perfect poise near the fireplace, one hand resting lightly on the mantelpiece. His voice, when it came, was soft but firm. And now, he said, we come to the final curtain, mes amis, the step that was not missed but manipulated, the fall that was not fate but design. He turned slowly to look at each face. My own heart thudded with anticipation. When Evelina Marchmont was found at the base of the grand staircase, the conclusion was swift. An accident. A tragic, unfortunate fall. So said the family. So said the doctor. But the body, even in death, spoke more truthfully than any of you. He gestured lightly. Her arms bore no defensive bruises. Her fingers, no scrapes from grasping at the rail. The trajectory of her body was inconsistent with a natural tumble. And then, the tea. The tea, I echoed. Oui, Hastings. The delicate floral blend she drank every evening before dinner. Served that night in her own porcelain cup, brought up to her room by the staff. Poirot tapped his temple. I had a sample retrieved. A stain was found on the saucer. Residue faint, but present. Lady Agatha gasped. Clara leaned forward in her chair. It was analysed, Poirot continued, by a discreet associate of Inspector Japp, and it contained traces of digitalis, foxglove, a poison that mimics heart palpitations, confusion, dizziness, and, in high enough doses, death. Sir Giles stood abruptly. That's absurd. Evelina never. Poirot raised his hand, calm but commanding. Digitalis, in small doses, leaves the mind intact while it destabilizes the body. Evelina was not clumsy. She was disoriented, her balance undermined, her strength sapped, before she ever set foot on the stairs. I felt the chill crawl up my spine. Poirot continued. And then came the push. A gentle one, perhaps, but unnecessary. She was already failing. The push was theatre. A final flourish to ensure her death would be mistaken for accident. He took a deep breath. But poison is not impulsive. It is prepared, measured. It requires knowledge, medical knowledge. His gaze turned, unmistakably, toward Dr. Pritchard. The doctor's face had gone pale. His mouth was tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. I think, Poirot said, that is the moment the audience would like to hear from the lead actor. And with that, the spotlight turned. All eyes now fixed upon Dr. Pritchard, who sat as though carved from marble, the polish gone from his professional veneer. He made no move to speak, but Poirot, ever the master of suspense, knew precisely when to let silence do the talking. When at last Pritchard did lift his head, his eyes were strangely calm, resigned, almost. "You have proof?" he asked, voice low. Poirot nodded. The handwriting on the death certificate does not match your usual form. Hesitant, inconsistent. And more importantly, you certified a fall as the sole cause of death, without so much as a second opinion or inquest. Convenient. Pritchard laughed once, short and bitter. No one questioned it. "Non," Poirot agreed, "because you are trusted. And what is more dangerous than a trusted man who has lost his reason?" The doctor's gaze darkened. Poirot's tone softened. "You loved her, did you not?" A pause. "Yes." It was the kind of confession that carried no pride, only weight. "I had known Evelina for years," Pritchard said finally, "long before Giles' Marchmont. She came to me with every trivial ailment. She confided in me. She smiled at me." He inhaled sharply. "And then she married him." Poirot nodded gently. "And yet, she still came to you, with her fears, her confusion." "She was frightened," Pritchard whispered. "He controlled her. I told her to leave. I told her I would help." "And she refused," Poirot said, "because she loved her husband." Pritchard looked down at his hands. "She said she didn't believe in making a scandal, that she would wait, try to make it work. But I knew. She would never leave him, and if I couldn't save her—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Poirot stepped closer. "You gave her the digitalis. A small dose at first. Perhaps only to make her ill, to weaken her. And then, on the final day, enough to render her dizzy, vulnerable. And when she descended the stairs, I helped gravity do its work," Pritchard said quietly. Gasps filled the room. You silenced the maid, Poirot added, dismissed her swiftly, and you signed the death certificate yourself. A forgery not just in ink, but in intention. Dr. Pritchard stood slowly, not to flee, but as if to acknowledge the truth with dignity. You can't prove all of that. Poirot tilted his head. Ah, but we can. For once, Doctor, science does not lie. As the room rang with silence once more, I looked toward Poirot. He simply adjusted his cuffs, turned slightly toward me, and whispered, "Love, mon ami, is a most dangerous medicine when taken in excess." Several days later, Poirot and I found ourselves walking through Hyde Park, beneath a sky that seemed undecided between sun and cloud. Spring was awakening across the city, daffodils in bloom, a crispness in the air that was invigorating after the long Sussex rain. Yet even among the joggers and children with paper boats, our conversation drifted inevitably back to Marchmont Manor. "I still don't know how you do it, Poirot," I said, hands in my pockets. At every turn, I thought I had it figured out. First Clara, then that thundering cousin of hers, and even Lady Agatha for a moment. But you were always 5 steps ahead. Poirot smiled modestly and adjusted the brim of his hat. Non, Hastings. Not 5 steps ahead, perhaps only 1. But one must know where to step, n'est-ce pas? I chuckled. Still, I was completely taken in by Dr. Pritchard, a respected physician, dignified, hardly the picture of a villain. Precisely why he succeeded, for a time, Poirot replied. His was a crime of elegance, not rage, a crime rehearsed in the mind long before it reached the hands. We paused by the water, watching ducks glide in orderly rows across the surface. Poirot pulled a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and dabbed at his brow, despite the mild weather. "You see, Hastings," he continued, "this was never merely about a fall, or even about poison. It was about power, control. Pritchard loved Evelina, but it was not a love that gave. It was one that sought to possess. When she chose another, he could not bear to see her slip from his grasp." I nodded slowly. So he made sure she'd never leave him again. Poirot gave a solemn nod. A permanent solution to a temporary heartbreak, as the saying goes. But alas, one must not underestimate the human heart. It is more dangerous than dynamite when handled without care. I let out a breath, watching it fog slightly in the spring air. "Well," I said, "thank heavens for your little grey cells." Poirot smiled. "They have their uses, oui." As we continued our walk along the Serpentine, Poirot's mood turned reflective. It was her letter, Hastings. That was where it all began to unravel. Not for the killer, but for me. I frowned. "The one delivered after her death." He nodded. "Oui. You recall her phrasing, 'If I am found dead, it will not be by accident.' Seemed rather direct to me." "Indeed. But also strategic. She does not say murdered or killed. She says, 'not by accident.' Subtle, yes?" She knew the danger was psychological as much as physical. Poirot paused to watch a young girl feed crumbs to pigeons, then resumed. "She also wrote, 'Trust no one, not even my husband.' And yet, she married him. Why would a woman so fearful enter into marriage?" I blinked. Perhaps she hoped things would change. "Non. That phrase, 'not even my husband,' suggests a deeper betrayal. It tells us she trusted someone else even less. Someone closer, perhaps in her inner circle, before the marriage. Someone she confided in. Someone she believed was watching her." I inhaled sharply. "Dr. Pritchard." Poirot nodded. He knew her routines, her anxieties. He was the only person who might dismiss her fears as nerves while slowly feeding them. That letter, hidden and formal, was her last act of independence. She wanted to make sure someone would hear her. "Oui," said Poirot softly. And she chose me. It was a gift, Hastings, but also a plea. We reached a bench near the park's entrance, and Poirot gestured for us to sit. From his coat, he pulled 2 folded papers and laid them on his knee. One was the Marchmont marriage certificate. The other, the death certificate signed by Dr. Pritchard himself. "Now observe," he said, handing them to me. I examined them carefully. Same name, yes, though I squinted. The handwriting's a bit different. "More than a bit," Poirot said, his eyes twinkling. "Look at the L in Lennox. On the marriage certificate, it loops with confidence. On the death certificate, trembling, angular, almost hesitant. So he was nervous. Oui, but not only that. He wrote it with his left hand." My head snapped toward him. "What?" Poirot nodded. "Pritchard is right-handed, but he signed the death certificate with his left. I confirmed it with the local pharmacist. Pritchard once injured his right hand years ago and had difficulty writing left-handed for prescriptions. The pharmacist remembered the scrawl." I stared at the documents. But why switch hands? Because he wished to distance himself, not from suspicion, but from emotion. He wanted the act to feel procedural, a formality, but his guilt betrayed him. His signature became his confession. I let out a long breath. A single letter, a scuff on a stair, a shaky L. That's all you needed. Poirot smiled serenely. The murderer, Hastings, always reveals himself, not in grand acts, but in details he believes are invisible. Fortunately, I look for the invisible. We stood to leave. "You always do, old friend," I said with a grin. "You always do." We had reached the gates of Hyde Park, and the city's bustle was beginning to seep into our quiet conversation. But Poirot, as ever, remained untouched by the outside world. His mind was still turning over the final pieces of the case. "You know, Hastings," he said, pausing beneath a tall elm tree, "the murder of Evelina Marchmont was not remarkable in its opportunity. Several people could have done it. Many had motive, and some had means. But none had the imagination." I blinked. Imagination. Oui, that, mon ami, is the essential ingredient in such crimes. Not just the cold logic of poison or the mechanics of a staircase fall. Number. It is the ability to conceal, to make the truth appear banal, to dress the murder in the garments of misfortune. He tapped his temple. Pritchard did not kill in haste. He composed his crime like a concerto. The poisoning, a silent erosion of Evelina's strength. The push, merely the crescendo. And the forged death certificate, a signature to end the piece. I shivered. And to think he might have gotten away with it. Perhaps, if he had been slightly less clever, Poirot said. But such men always overreach. They believe they are artists. But art, Hastings, is honest. Murder, however elegant, always stains. He adjusted his cuffs, then added with a faint smile. Imagination, used in the service of justice, is brilliance. Used in the service of jealousy, it becomes tragedy. That evening, as we returned to Whitehaven Mansions, we found a single envelope slipped beneath the door. Poirot bent, retrieved it, and held it up with a flicker of curiosity. "It is from Clara Worthing," he said, examining the delicate handwriting. He opened it carefully and read aloud. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I wish to thank you for bringing the truth to light. The past weeks have been difficult, but healing has begun. Giles has asked me to marry him, and I have accepted. I hope Evelina would not disapprove. Yours sincerely, Clara Worthing." I let out a low whistle. Well, I didn't see that coming. Poirot folded the letter and placed it neatly on the mantel. "Ah, Mademoiselle Clara, the heart is resilient, is it not?" But Giles, I asked, after all that's happened? Poirot shrugged. Perhaps she believes she can rebuild what was broken. Or perhaps, more likely, she wishes to guard what remains of Evelina's world. Sometimes, mon ami, affection takes curious forms. I frowned. You don't approve? Je ne juge pas, Poirot replied smoothly. I merely observe. And in observing, I say this. The human heart is not so different from a case of murder. It too is full of motives, contradictions, and secrets. I laughed. Well, it's a good thing you've never tried to solve that one. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, Hastings, but I have, and I assure you, it is the most impossible case of all. As the case of Lady Evelina Marchmont draws to a close, we are reminded of the great lesson that Hercule Poirot tirelessly reiterates. Truth will always come to light, no matter how cleverly it's concealed. The seemingly ordinary elements of this case, from a letter hidden in poetry to a trembling signature, held the key to unravelling the deception. Poirot's brilliant mind, ever so attentive to the smallest detail, showed us that even the most elaborate ruse cannot withstand the scrutiny of logical deduction. Indeed, it is the imagination of a murderer that betrays him, Poirot says, and in this case, his psychological approach to understanding human motives was the very tool that led to the truth. For, as Poirot always says, it is not the crime itself, but the concealment of the crime that makes it dangerous. Hastings, ever the observer, couldn't help but add his own reflection with a grin. Well, Poirot, if we ever need to start a detective agency of our own, I think I'll take the job of writing the letter. Seems to be the most dangerous part of the whole affair. Now we'd like to know, what do you think was the biggest clue that exposed the murderer in this case? Was it the subtle changes in handwriting, the missing letter, or perhaps something else you noticed along the way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more thrilling detective stories to life every day. And stay tuned. More clever Poirot mysteries are coming your way soon. Until next time, mes amis, keep observing, and as Poirot would say, do not let the little grey cells rest.